During an interview promoting Supergirl, director Craig Gillespie said he specifically avoided reading Woman of Tomorrow, the comic this movie is heavily inspired by, when pitching the film based on Anna Negata's script.
I actually deliberately stayed away from Woman of Tomorrow at this point because I wanted to really dig into like the visual language that I was looking for. And they went with it.
I'm starting to wish I did the same thing, because as someone who thoroughly enjoyed that book, masterfully illustrated by Bilquis Evely and Matt Lopes, I am so conflicted about Supergirl. I wanted to love this so bad. It was one of my most anticipated movies of the year, and while I did enjoy my time, it felt like so much missed potential. Honestly, my instant reaction walking out of the theater was a weird combination of liking it, but feeling so confused and disappointed that it didn't meet my expectations. It was one of those quiet drives home after, as I had to figure out what to do now. Kill myself, I guess? No? I still have to review the movie first? Okay, let's just get that out of the way then. The main reason I'm so conflicted about Supergirl is that they sold us the promise of this movie adapting that comic only for the actual film to make drastic changes that kind of undermine the narrative, so it all comes down to the idea of grading this movie on what it actually is, a pretty fun film, or what it's trying to be, a much more ambitious story. On a whole though, Supergirl is a pretty good movie held back by some baffling creative choices and iffy visuals. Thankfully, Milly Alock is great as Kara. She effortlessly balanced her charisma and grief to give a really nuanced performance, but unfortunately, fast pacing doesn't flesh out her dynamic with Ruthye enough, and when your entire movie revolves around that, it's gonna sting. It also doesn't help that Krem of the Yellow Hills is a frustratingly weak villain to work around. It's not like he's anything special in the comic, but somehow in their attempt to make him less generic, they made him even more generic. Still, the movie itself is a fun and grungy trip through the galaxy as Kara is enlisted by Ruthye to track down Krem of the Yellow Hills after he killed her parents and some other very nefarious stuff. There's so much personality and charm to it with strong performances from everybody involved, but I cannot stress enough that there are some truly bizarre decisions that keep Supergirl from reaching its true potential and living up to the comic it's adapting. Especially when it came to the cinematography, that left a lot to be desired. At least Jason Momoa is great as Lobo, as if that was ever in question. I just wish he had literally any impact on the story. I know this review sounds very negative, trust me, I'm not happy about it either, but this movie is a fun ride. It's just the fact that I know this could have been more which hurts the most. I am extremely confident of the fact that if I never read the comic the movie is based on, I would enjoy it so much more. I'm really curious to see if I'd settle into the changes on a rewatch, but thus is the burden of an adaptation. Even without that knowledge though, I feel like a lot of my other problems with this movie are due to the short runtime. This movie is an hour and 48 minutes, and I just don't think it's enough time to tell the story they're trying to in a way that's as emotionally impactful as it should be. Supergirl is much more of a rich character study than Superman was as we dive deep into Kara's trauma, but sadly, there just isn't enough time to breathe and give these characters the time they deserve. By the end of the ride, no matter how fun it may have been, it feels like the movie was missing something. It is so much missed potential on a grand scale to not go all out with this movie to give us something truly experimental and revolutionary, as the movie never reached the emotional heights the comic did, but also, it doesn't reach the emotional heights it sets up within the film itself. Both Milly Alock and Kara Zor-El deserved a more complete film that's much more than just pretty good. Before we get into spoiler territory and talk about the story structure of the film, I want to dive into the technical aspects of the movie real quick. Alright, let's just rip the band-aid off and talk about the cinematography right up top. When that first teaser dropped back in December, my biggest problem with the film was how it looked, and I was doing some heavy coping at the time, hoping they were just holding back on the gorgeous visuals for the film itself, which, I mean, looking back, that was insane, right? Now having seen the movie though, I can confidently say that the visuals of this film just don't work for me. Don't get me wrong, there are some shots and sequences that look gorgeous, but most of the time, it's a really weird muddy brown as everything tends to bleed into each other, nothing stands out on screen. The only thing that really pops is the Supergirl costume, but that's only on screen for the last 10 minutes of the movie, so until then, you're just waiting for something to stand out in the color grading, and it oh so very rarely does. This is mostly a problem with the exterior shots, because when they're inside, they're able to control the lighting and make it look good on the regular. Unfortunately then, the characters walk outside into a world that doesn't really have an identity. The big elephant in the room here is that the Woman of Tomorrow comic might be the single most beautiful comic I have ever read in my entire life. Bilquis Evely and Matt Lopes' art style is mind-blowingly gorgeous with colors that are so distinctly vibrant as every single panel is framed like a painting. I went out of my way to buy this book just so I could admire the art in person because it is breathtakingly beautiful. I swear, flip to any random page in the book and you're gonna see the most beautiful frame you've ever seen in your entire life. Look at this! That's just two characters talking. That is insane. So with all that in mind, I cannot fathom the fact that you would make a movie that does not even try to replicate that artistry. It's not like this is some random comic. This book is known for for its art. There is an expectation that comes with adaptation to at least match that level of quality. And yet here we are with a film that is so lifeless. I get that Gillespie wanted to have this grungy approach to fit the tone of the movie, but the art is the best thing about Woman of Tomorrow, and the way that it contrasts with the dark story they're telling is so much more compelling than anything that looks like this. Maybe they didn't think they'd be able to pull this off in live action, or wanted to do something different to give this movie its own unique identity. That's fine. But with comic art this stunning, if you're not gonna do that, you should be doing something that is at least as good as that, if that's even possible. You know what? Hold on. It's not even like it's impossible. Look at Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, a movie that pretty much did this kind of aesthetic. You're telling me you couldn't do something like that? Really? I don't know, man. I don't understand why they wouldn't go that way. Even separating myself away from this comic, the visuals we see on screen are just too washed out and muddy for me to really get invested on how the film looks. For a movie that boasts about being this galaxy-spanning road trip as they visit several different planets across the film, it's so weird to me how outside of one, maybe two locations, they all have such a samey aesthetic to each other. It's one thing if there's only one planet that has this very grungy brown aesthetic to it, but when the entire movie has this kind of color grading, even when you visit Metropolis, it makes the entire universe feel smaller as it all looks the same, when you could have been using this as an opportunity to give each planet a distinct vibe and color scheme to make it all stand out. It also doesn't help that there is some really rough VFX at times, especially when it comes to the green screen. I found that to be really noticeable at times, to the point where it kind of takes you out of a scene. Also, if I'm gonna get nitpicky, the editing was a little messy at times as well. Usually I'm not one to notice editing in film, unless it's supposed to be a very flashy, in-your-face style. I think the best editing blends into the background, but there were some jarring cuts here that made me wonder if the movie was cut down at all. I know I've already said it, but I have to stress it again that there is just so little room to breathe as the film is going from one moment to the next, to the next, to the next, with very few moments to pause. Those quiet scenes when you take a rest from the unrelenting action are my favorite parts of the comic, so to see that all taken away as we speed through the story, it doesn't sit right with me. Okay, on a more positive note real quick, I actually really liked the action in this movie. I thought it was good across the board. There's a lot of really creative and dynamic movement in the way Supergirl fights that's different from Superman, as she's much more of a brawler getting down and dirty in the thick of it. Add in some fun uses of slow-mo to heighten the action and show you that impact, along with Kara just casually volleying people like it's nothing. It is so satisfying to see. I swear, there is nothing cooler than watching a Kryptonian fight someone when they know they don't have to hold back. Supergirl is on demon time in this movie with the way she's moving around. Whether it be fight scenes showing just how capable she is without her powers and even drunk, or finally getting to see her let loose in the third act of the film as Supergirl. That being said, I think Kara gets incapacitated a bit too much in the movie. Off the top of my head, there's at least 3 different sequences where they find a way to take away her powers. The first I completely get, as they show her fighting prowess without the abilities. The second, they were testing my patience a little bit, but when she gets taken out in the third act and she needs somebody else to save her, that was pushing it way too far for my liking. Please just let Supergirl be Supergirl more in the Supergirl movie, guys. Let's keep this back and forth of praise and critique going. I like this rhythm we got going on here. The prosthetics and creature design in the film are phenomenal. Pretty much every alien that appears has a really unique, memorable, and most importantly, fully practical look. You can really tell they put in the work to make these planets feel alive with aliens that just exist on the planet. Things especially get fun when you get to these hot spots with so many different species populating an area, and you could just admire how many different designs they thought of. The absolute highest compliment I could give them is that these designs feel ripped straight out of Star Wars. There's one specific pair of aliens you meet on the bus that I adore. They did a great job bringing these characters to life. What I don't think they did a good job with, though, is the score and general soundtrack for the film. It was one of the things I was most interested and worried about going into the movie because, fun fact, they cycled through 3 separate composers in the production of the film. I don't know why, and I would love to find out, but I guess they just weren't happy with what they got, despite the first one we heard from Ramin Djawadi being phenomenal with this electric synthwave. And instead of that, we get a final score in this film that's hardly noticeable whatsoever, which is weird because after the movie, I went out of my way to listen to the soundtrack, and her theme is good, so I guess it all just comes down to an editing issue as they didn't prioritize it like they should have. That was a big disappointment for me, especially coming off of Superman, which had one of my favorite film scores in superhero history. There are these big emotional moments they build up to, but they don't hit as hard as they could because the score has no weight to it. Instead, they populate this movie with a lot of needle drops that have varying degrees of success, but there's one specific one in the third act in the big final climax of the film that is so ridiculously out of place, it took me out of the movie for a few seconds trying to figure out what the hell was happening. It is an insane choice. I promise you, in a million years, you would not predict what song they use. Even more so considering that Call Me isn't in the movie whatsoever despite being so heavily featured in all the marketing. I feel like that was the spot for it to hit, and it just doesn't. So that's not great, but to end this section on a positive note, this film has so much charm to it. It is a really funny movie and just delightful to watch. It does a really good job keeping your attention, always doing something interesting on screen. The way every character bounces off of each other is so much fun, and Milly brings a ton of life to every single scene. It is the furthest thing from a dull movie, and pretty compelling throughout when they aren't making bizarre adaptation choices. To sum all of this up before I dive into the spoilers, I would say this movie is pretty good. A very solid 3-star action film, which makes things very hard when it comes to recommendations. If you haven't read Woman of Tomorrow, I would recommend this movie, if not just for the sheer fact that you can go watch the movie and then tell me what you thought so I can see what somebody who didn't experience that comic thinks of the film. I feel like non-comic readers are going to enjoy this a lot more than I did, but if you have read the book, please temper your expectations. It's more so loosely based on Woman of Tomorrow rather than the direct adaptation they've been selling us all this time, as they boil down a very expansive, reflective story into a more paint-by-the-numbers blockbuster exploring grief. There's definitely joy to be found in it, but not as much as I know there could have been with a longer runtime, stronger script, and better visuals. Oh man, it did disappoint me, and that is such a massive bummer. Not just because of how Milly and this whole movie deserved better, but for the sheer fact that the worst people you know are going to be celebrating this, and I can't stand that. I'm already seeing the most irritating grifters trying to use Supergirl's disappointment as a way to push this kind of agenda that female-led comic book movies don't work, so I want to be very firm on this. If that's the lesson you take away from this movie, you could not be more wrong, because Milly Alock's Supergirl is the strongest part of the film. There are so many other female-led comic book movies like Birds of Prey, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, or Thunderbolts that prove it's not the fault of these women. In the case of Supergirl, they just decided to make a comic adaptation that barely adapted the comic in service of a more generic story. I am so grateful it's already been confirmed that we're going to see more of Milly's Supergirl in Man of Tomorrow, because I am looking forward to seeing as much of this character as possible. And now I'm going to tell you why as we enter the spoiler section of the video, so here's your last big warning before we talk about spoilers. Okay, 3, 2, 1, here we go. They shot the out of that dog, and I damn near started cheering in that theater. If anything, as morbid as this might sound, I think it should have been more brutal. Sorry, Krypto, love ya, but you gotta get shot for this movie to happen, so we might as well make it a spectacle and let that dog suffer. Now that I got that out of my system, let's get back to talking about the star of this movie, Milly Alock as Supergirl. James Gunn, if you're watching this, and I know you are, so first, why did you say The Flash was one of the greatest movies of all time? But second, I need you to give Milly Alock the world. She is an absolute powerhouse on screen with such a great star presence. I got a feeling that in 5 to 10 years, we're going to be talking about her as one of the all-time great comic book movie castings. We are so lucky to have her playing Supergirl. This kind of story asks her to play a lot of really complex emotions, and she does it with ease, going from this broken, clearly traumatized survivor to someone clearly putting on this mask and using alcohol as a coping mechanism, having the time of her life trying to ignore her problems. And at the same time as all of that, she's actively trying to learn how to become a hero. Yet because of how talented Milly is, she's able to go back and forth between each kind of mood to make Kara feel like a very natural and organic character. I can't tell you enough how much I adore this take on Kara as a complete and total mess. It's one of the changes from the comics I actually really appreciate, as they let her be a vulnerable and emotional wreck for the entirety of the story. In the Woman of Tomorrow comic, she starts out at her worst point, but very quickly sobers up and puts on this facade to make it seem like everything is okay that you get to see break down over the course of the book. Here though, in the movie, they just let Kara be a walking disaster, and I think it really works for this story, especially with how much we get to dive deep into her grief and trauma. This is a character who is so fundamentally broken after watching her people slowly die in front of her. Yeah, that's gonna mess somebody up, and I think it is such a smart idea to openly embrace that with a character like Kara, to explore that to its full potential. It also does a really good job separating her from Superman, which I think is incredibly important for those casual audience members that don't understand why Supergirl is so cool in the first place. She is so charming and funny with this very irreverent tone as she walks through each planet without a care in the world because she has nothing to care about besides Krypto, and then when he gets taken away from her, it sends her on the warpath. In doing so, they immediately create a character who, despite her otherworldly abilities, is an emotional underdog you just can't help but root for, as you want to see her get back on her 2 feet and find her sense of hope again. What I really like the most about her characterization, though, is that she isn't just edgy for the sake of being edgy. That was something I was admittedly worried about, that they would go a little too far pushing Kara in the opposite direction to the point where she becomes unrecognizable from her proper characterization. But they do a really good job walking that line between giving Kara this more brash personality and showing that she's still Supergirl deep down. And the way they do that is by highlighting her endurance and survival in the face of absolute adversity. She goes through a lot in not just this movie, but throughout her entire life, and the common theme there of watching her be defiant throughout it all, pushing back against the world and still helping out where she can, is great. They allow her to be a really flawed character, making tons of mistakes throughout the movie, as she is far from perfect, but she is still good and kind. Outside of one Krem-related thing at the end of the movie, I think they do a really good job perfecting her characterization here, as they make a character you can't help but love and look up to. The best way they do that is through my favorite aspect of this movie, the flashbacks on Argo City. One of the things I was most looking forward to in Supergirl was exploring more of Krypton. After Superman's interesting depiction of it, I was hoping that Supergirl would be able to flesh out that world more and give us a more nuanced understanding of what life was like there, and they did exactly that and then some. Funnily enough, they do double down on Jor-El being incredibly evil for real, so you can rule out Brainiac interfering with the message. But thankfully, this movie does prove that only Jor-El and Lara are evil, and the rest of Krypton is just pretty normal by comparison. So that right there gives me a lot of hope to see Kara and Clark come together in Man of Tomorrow, bonding over their different cultures as they teach the other what they've been missing out on. But to get back on track and talk more about Kara, the flashbacks in this movie are handled perfectly. Every single one of them feels ripped straight out of another movie. It's a real clash of styles from the rest of the film in all the right ways. Krypton and Argo City should noticeably be different and stand out from the rest of the movie to show what made it so special in the first place, and I think they do a great job with production design in making that look good. Considering how traumatic Kara's origin is, as it's still impacting her today, it's not enough for her to just say her people died and it made her sad. It is incredibly important that we get to see life on Argo City to understand exactly what Kara is missing out on Earth. If anything, I wanted to see more of those scenes on Argo City to see just how bad it got before they had to send her away. At one point, it even seemed like the movie had those scenes in the film, but they cut them for some reason during the test screenings, and I really wish we got to see more of that. There's a really great moment in the comic when they have to cover Argo City in lead just to survive, and I think that would have been a great way to show us how bad the conditions got there. When your entire movie revolves around loss, you gotta make sure that loss is felt, and they do a really good job fleshing that out by giving us her relationship with Zor-El, masterfully played by David Krumholtz. Not that I was expecting him to do bad, because he's a consistently good actor, but he makes the most of his little screen time to give a fantastic performance as Zor-El. He brings so much warmth and care to the role, giving us this insight on what life on Argo City is like. He's effortlessly delivering these impassioned monologues that make Kara's time on Argo City feel important. That way, when we watch it get brutally ripped away from her, you actually feel something. And I have to give them a ton of props for the fact that they committed to having all of the Argo City flashbacks be done in the language on Krypton, which, what is it, like Kryptonian? Kryptonese? Whatever it is. It's really impressive. Having to act in a foreign language you don't know is already a hard job, but giving emotional performances in a totally made-up language that doesn't feel like gibberish is a whole new level of talent. Both David Krumholtz and Milly Alock do a fantastic job in all of those flashbacks to make it by far my favorite part of the movie. That being said, if you don't mind me throwing in a quick nitpick, I didn't love they went with the origin where Kara is explicitly born on Argo City and didn't get to experience Krypton, but that's not too big of a deal because her growing up on Argo not knowing any other life differently is still a very interesting take on the character. I just like the idea of her getting to experience Krypton, then having that ripped away, re-establishing a life on Argo City, and then having that ripped away to add even more trauma to her character as it fundamentally changes her dynamic with Superman. On the topic of Superman though, David was in this movie a lot more than I expected, and I think it really works. First of all, his Superman is so special. Every time that dork appears on screen, it puts the biggest smile on my face. Even now it's happening. He has such a wonderfully welcoming screen presence that I can't help but love seeing him more. Thankfully, for as much as I do love seeing him, he's not just here for the sake of being a cameo, as he actually gets to play an important role in the story and influencing Kara. I love how this movie kind of showed his flaws, in a sense being so overbearing, trying to push his life onto Kara, not allowing her to make her own choices right away. For as much as I love Clark, I think it is so much more interesting to show how Kara would perceive him as someone she just can't relate to. The brief moments we get of their dynamic together in this film are great. I cannot wait to see more of them in Man of Tomorrow as they grow closer and closer together. You can't exactly do something like Supergirl's arrival on Earth and not have Superman in the scene, so of course it makes sense for him to be there, but I love his continued presence throughout the movie as someone trying to help Kara despite not knowing how to. Some of the few times we do get breathing room in this movie is exploring that origin and watching Kara arrive on Earth, trying to adjust, and the struggles of having nobody. Watching Kara Kara completely alone in her room in Metropolis, more isolated than ever in the most popular city on the planet, is a really great touch to just show how disconnected she is from Earth. These are incredibly significant scenes that do a great job informing you of Kara's headspace and showing you why she is the way she is, drinking herself to a blackout in space. We get to explore more of the burden that comes with being a Kryptonian, as all of these powers don't make up for the fact that she just wants to feel. And that emotional through line in the movie of seeing her so alone, not knowing how to make friends and find her people, makes her so incredibly relatable, which might sound like a bit of a self-report now that I've said it out loud, but I don't care. She is an incredibly relatable and human character, which is great because all of this insight into her personality and what made her the way she is informs her decision-making, how she interacts with Ruthye. The crux of this movie revolves around the fact that Krem of the Yellow Hills killed Ruthie's family, and now she wants revenge, thus putting Kara on the path of the hero's journey as she refuses the call to action. But then, because she didn't go to stop Krem, he ends up shooting Krypto, forcing her to finally accept helping Ruthye since she's gonna go on that journey anyway and end up hurting herself. We get to see Kara act as this protector and mentor to Ruthye, and I really enjoy what we get of their dynamic in the film, especially with how they butt heads. Ruthye comes from a completely different culture and isn't afraid to call Kara out for how messy she is, which is exactly what she needs to hear, and while Kara might still be a mess, she's doing everything in her power to try and teach Ruthye the right lessons about life. They've got a really interesting back and forth as these two characters who are practically forced together, which is fine and all, but here's the thing. My issue comes with the fact that it should have been great. The biggest victim of the short runtime is not giving us nearly enough of Kara and Ruthye actually bonding together. The ideas are all there on paper, but I don't think the execution was done as well as it could have been, so when you get to this big climax at the end of the movie, it doesn't feel earned. What makes the Woman of Tomorrow comic work so well is that you spend 8 issues watching Kara and Ruthye bond together. During that time, we're able to see Kara teach Ruthye more direct lessons on this journey across the galaxy, but also, the books are afforded more time to let them go on side quests. These things that you don't think would impact the overall plot, but end up showing us really important lessons that Ruthye needs to hear before she goes to fight Krem. It feels to me like this movie cut out a lot of that, and that's fine. I understand you can't fit all of it into one movie, but you can at least replace it with something substantial that makes Kara feel like a more direct mentor to Ruthye. To me, the movie is missing 1 to 2 big moments of actually letting us see these two characters grow and form an authentic bond with each other, because by the time it comes for Ruthye to make her decision, it really doesn't feel like these two know each other enough, as Kara hasn't had as big of an impact as she should on Ruthie's life. Outside of a few fight scenes, there aren't nearly enough moments where Ruthye is able to observe Kara out there in the world helping people and her reactions to all of the evil in the world. And I get that she's not really fully fledged Supergirl at this point, but you should still be putting Kara in these situations where, even though she's not a hero, she is still stepping up to help people because she knows it's the right thing to do and wants to set a good example for Ruthye. She doesn't even need to be consciously doing it, which probably makes it more impactful if Ruthye is able to just see Kara go out of her way to do these things. The film is simply just not long enough to give us those impactful moments, and you can really feel it in their dynamic. But at least Kara does get some moments to step up and show why she is a hero. The thing that annoys me the most about this movie is that Ruthye doesn't get a single moment to properly shine. She has such little agency in the story that outside of one sequence where she kind of saves Kara, she never gets to prove her worth and show how she is a competent fighter, or is put into a situation where she can influence Kara and inspire her to be better. Not to keep going back to the comic, but Woman of Tomorrow is Ruthie's story first and foremost. And I completely understand that when adapting this as a Supergirl origin story, you gotta make Kara feel important, but you can make Ruthye feel just as important in a way that impacts Kara. Instead, a character who is supposed to be the heart of the movie never gets to properly beat. It's a shame too, because Eve Ridley does a really good job as Ruthye. Her defiant and persistent personality is spot on as she speaks in these formal tongues, taking everything way too seriously. They do a really great job setting up her characterization, but fumble it as they undercook her character arc with such little screen time. It's like they were afraid to let her get involved in the mix of things, and thus, because of that, when we get to the end of the film, it felt like both her and Kara's journeys went by a little too fast. Ruthye never gets a defining moment where she shows Kara the error of her ways and inspires her to be more hopeful. Instead of Kara having that epiphany, she just kind of passes out, has a flashback, and then decides to put on the costume and be Supergirl. It's that third act where the movie loses me the most, as there's clearly some important character moments that just aren't there, but the movie acts like they happened. It's a glaring hole in the story I couldn't get over because it means the ending isn't as satisfying as it could have been. And the part that might sting the most is that even with the inclusion of a character like Lobo, he's not able to fill that hole as he does doesn't do anything significant in this movie. Actually, no, he does do something significant. It's just another bad change that I don't understand why they added in. When he saves Kara from Krem at the end of the movie, this big moment where she's finally Supergirl, instead of being able to overpower things on her own, she needs Lobo's help. That right there got under my skin, and maybe it wouldn't have been as offensive if Lobo did something in the movie, but it feels like they just needed to try and justify his presence, so they gave him this moment at the end of the film so it seemed like he was important. But outside of that one scene, if you took him out of this movie, literally nothing would change. Let me run through this real quick just to make sure I'm not losing my mind. Kara and Ruthye first cross paths with Lobo at the bar when they find out he's trying to collect a bounty on one of Krem's men. Then, when Krem arrives on this planet, Lobo shows back up to try and collect his bounty, and we get this big action sequence when him and Supergirl are fighting side by side, clearing out Krem's men. But then Lobo isn't really needed for a bit, so he just kind of disappears up until Ruthye gets captured and thrown in prison, when Lobo is just also conveniently thrown in prison. I get that he does tease he purposefully got himself locked up, but they don't do a good job proving that, as he needs Ruthye to unlock his cell for him to get out. All it would have taken is one scene where Ruthye is about to unlock his cell and he kicks the door down to show he could have done that at any time. But whatever, I'm getting off topic. Because Ruthye would have gotten out of that cell anyways, so Lobo's just really there as set dressing. Then, he makes his last appearance in the third act of the film as he helps Kara get out of the kryptonite trap she's in. He collects his bounty, and then he just kind of leaves. So why was Lobo in this movie? I love the idea of Lobo being there, and I think you could have done something really interesting they barely explore, with Lobo being the devil on Ruthie's shoulder, encouraging her to kill Krem, while Kara is trying to prevent that. But instead, he's just kind of there. Lobo not having a single impact on the story really disappointed me because he's not in the Woman of Tomorrow comic. His inclusion here got me really excited because surely there would have been a reason to add him to that story, but no, he's just kind of there to flesh out the universe and I guess set up a Lobo project down the line. It's a real shame his appearance in this movie doesn't have any real impact on the narrative because Jason Momoa is so goddamn good as Lobo. Everybody and their mother, especially yours, knew he would be great casting. He was practically born to play this character, but what I really appreciate is that he's not just playing Jason Momoa, something he has a tendency to do. He put in the work to make Lobo feel like Lobo, even changing the cadence of his voice and the way that he speaks to make him feel more alien. He is a bundle of chaos every time he appears on screen as this self-centered, sadistic maniac you just can't help but look away from because of how incredibly charismatic he is. It's like the movie shifts into another gear whenever he appears. I love his role as this fun, chaotic element added to the movie. I just wish that that chaos influenced the movie in any meaningful way. It doesn't have to be anything big as long as you justify why he's here. Have him cost Kara a chance at getting at Krem. Let him be there to help Kara get across the universe by riding on his space hog. Or with how many times those two specifically cross paths, have him tie more into Ruthie's journey. Just let Lobo do something because he is so interesting with an infectious energy he brings to every scene. He just doesn't feel important in the grand scheme of things. Which, funnily enough, is something you could also say about the main villain of this movie, Krem of the Yellow Hills. By far, my biggest problem with the film. I don't think there's a single aspect of this character I actually like. For starters, his design is so bad. When that first trailer dropped, I really didn't love it and was hopeful I would ease into it, but no, it sucks. There's just nothing interesting about the way he looks. So much so that his very generic design in the comic is infinitely better than this, whatever this is supposed to be. He looks like a background character you'd see in a movie like Guardians of the Galaxy as this random Ravager Star-Lord would take 3 seconds to roast, calling him a botched pinhead because he's so goddamn ugly. I'm not gonna pretend like Krem has this masterful design in the comics. I could not draw him from memory, but I think it really works in the high fantasy setting of that story. And you know what, hot take alert, I like the fact that he looks generic. It fits the context of the comic. The idea that this random nobody could commit an act so atrocious like shooting a dog influences the story and tells so much about the evil in the world. When you have 8 issues telling the story about why revenge is bad, I think it's more impactful when the world surrounding them is so corrupt and evil, and Krem represents that. These random acts of violence just sitting out there, making it even more impactful when you choose to be good in the face of that. That is what Krem has represented to me in the context of Woman of Tomorrow. It's nothing groundbreaking and he's not a very notable villain, but it works within the confines of the narrative to reinforce the themes. When you strip that away and redesign Krem to put him in this ugly black armor, trying to make him look edgy and threatening like a rejected Mad Max character who's too on the nose, it just comes off as so uninteresting and bland. It doesn't help that I don't don't love Matthias Schoenhardt's performance as Krem. It's both too much and not enough at the same time, as he's trying to be overly zany and quirky, doing these outlandish things, taking joy in everything that's happening around him, but it never goes as far as it should. If you're gonna do something like that, you have to commit to that, and this performance feels like a half-assed attempt to make Krem feel intimidating that never worked for me. It sticks out like a sore thumb when everybody else is giving compelling performances and he's just there doing whatever that's supposed to be. I think this design could have been salvaged if Matthias was able to give a performance that wasn't so weirdly low energy for how erratic he's supposed to be. It's like they want you to think he's unpredictable, but he never does anything unpredictable. His presentation is just sadly off on every account, and I could not get into this character. The change I feel the most conflicted on when it comes to Krem, though, is how they alter his motivations. In the comic, Krem only kills Ruthie's father after he didn't laugh at one of his jokes. In the movie, he kills Ruthie's parents and brother after he got startled just because he could. The entire movie revolves around that kill right there, and I think that stripping away the personality from it makes it feel more generic and not as impactful. The idea that Krem is able to just casually kill somebody because they didn't laugh at their joke feels so much more intentional and twisted, as he's this shallow asshole. And also, Krem being less memorable works in the book because it's about the journey to get there. He is just a narrative tool. So when the movie cuts a lot of that journey out, I understand they need to make changes to fix that, but unfortunately in doing so, those changes just make Krem feel even more forgettable. But here's the thing. Again, okay, it's a good transition. Quick trigger warning for you for topics of sexual assault, because they also make Krem a human trafficking pedophile rapist, which is wild because it completely changes the whole context of his character and thus the story as a whole. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love to see a pedo get what's coming to them. I just don't think the movie fleshes out those stakes well enough to make that decision at the end of the film hit as hard as it should. And when they make him this specifically evil, it strips away a lot of the nuance about the debate of whether he needs to die or not. It is a really big change that completely alters the context of the narrative itself, and if you're gonna do something like that, then you have to make sure that reveal shakes the narrative, whereas in this film, it just kind of feels like an afterthought. The thing about Krem in the comics is that he's a character who causes this random act of violence that Kara and Ruthie slowly learn more and more about until they realize he's an absolute monster. It presents a really interesting and complex argument for whether or not someone like that should live or die, as they question the cycle of violence. But this movie takes a wholly different approach to the kind of evil he is, as from the start you know that he's running a human trafficking ring, kidnapping and killing little girls just so he can expand his race of only men. This right here is where all of my conflicting feelings about the movie really start to come out. On paper, I do understand the approach of trying to make Krem a more compelling character, as Kara is able to destroy a human trafficking ring and save all those little girls. With better execution and more narrative weight, that is a really empowering idea to throw in there. But I also feel like those changes are so big, it completely alters the perception of the story they're telling to the point where it becomes almost unrecognizable from the comic. So, it's finally time to talk about the big important section of this video, breaking down the comic versus movie adaptation even more in depth as I go through the differences between the two and if it works or not. Jesus, that's a mouthful. I never was good at titling this stuff. This is basically going to be my own form of therapy as I try and figure out what I like and what I don't like in the film, because some of these changes are real head scratchers. Unlike some comic fans, I'm fine with adaptations being different from the comics. I know that's crazy to say after you just heard me yap for 30 minutes about how I don't like the changes they made, but it's because of the way they're handled. I never want to see a one-to-one page-to-screen adaptation in my life that is boring and almost insulting to the source material, implying that it's only valid when it's adapted. If you want to see that story exactly as is, go read the comic. Let adaptations do something different and adapt to the medium they're in. What matters most to me is that as long as you capture the core of the story you are adapting and the changes are either as good or better than the comic, I'm gonna be happy. In the case of Supergirl, I don't think the movie does that, as it directly goes against the comic's messaging. On the whole, there are a lot of different changes this movie makes from the comic. Some big, some small, some I don't care about, some I like, some I don't like. Let me start by giving them some more props, because there's one big change I really did like. I think this story works so much better as an origin. I make it no secret that I'm not a big fan of Tom King as a writer, but Woman of Tomorrow is the exception. Most of the time, he's a very deconstructive writer who often ignores what came before to make it work for his story. So in the comics, despite how good Woman of Tomorrow is, it comes after decades of Supergirl history that it just kind of conveniently ignores to give Kara this new personality. With the movie retrofitting that story to make it an origin for Kara, I think that works so much better for her growth and actually letting us see her personality change. This way, when Kara starts out as an absolute train wreck of a human being, it feels more natural and less jarring because she's still actively grieving the loss of her entire culture and people. It's not like she gets over that by the end of the movie, and nor should she ever, but her tone and approach is very different as she becomes more in line with her comic counterpart. It's that kind of change I really appreciate because they clearly thought through what would work best for this universe and realized the benefits of making this an early days Supergirl story. Especially when you're using Ruthye as a point of view character that meets Supergirl and learns about her world as an introduction. That way we still get the classic origin moments fed to us in a natural way, all while progressing Kara in the modern day. What I felt was really missing from this movie though are the following changes. We don't get the space dragon fight or the drug-induced phoenix bird powers. Instead, they fight some teleporting techno-pirates and she conveniently uses the yellow sun in a way where she just kind of falls into place. Admittedly, the teleporting fight is well done. I don't necessarily have a problem with that, even if I do miss the space dragon. I just wish that Kara was able to more firmly save the day rather than stumbling into a solution. And also, because of that whole fight and spending more time on that bus stop area, we get one of the best moments from the comic, a quiet scene of Kara teaching Ruthye how to wash her hands. It probably feels unnecessary when I say it like that, but it is such a powerful scene of Kara teaching Ruthye this act of kindness from the beginning and making her life better, as these two immediately start to bond with each other. It is such a beautiful, tender moment that then transpires into a really powerful conversation as Kara is asked about Krypton for the first time by Ruthye. It's more moments like that which this movie was severely missing out on, as we get to see Kara be more caring to Ruthye as she struggles with her identity. Another moment like that I really liked from the comic is when Kara uses her super speed to dig 120 graves in 5 seconds just to help some old little goblin guy. It's such a quick moment, but another example of Kara going out of her way to help people when she didn't have to. And on top of that, all of these dead bodies are victims of the Brigands massacre. If you had shown us something like that and horrifically tied it into the human trafficking ring Krem was running, it would give more weight to that story. I feel like this movie version of Ruthye could have benefited from seeing that kind of compassion firsthand, showing that the galaxy isn't wholly evil, as even in the face of absolute horror, she still helps people in need. Another thing I wish was in this movie is the Mordru globe, teleporting them across the universe. In the comic, that is how Krem gets Kara to the Green Sun planet, and I think it is a really effective way to show how crafty he is. The Mordru globe sets up the second time Krem tries to use it, when Kara outsmarts him by riding on Comet the Superhorse to ride at the speed of light to outrun the Mordru globe and reach the end of the universe in the most beautiful sequence in the entire book. To be honest with you, I didn't think for a single second they were going to do Comet the Superhorse. It is such an out there idea as this man who was turned into a horse, and also had feelings for Supergirl, and also they kissed that one time, which is a lot to dive into. But I don't know, maybe Lobo could have filled that role and his space hog could have gone that fast. At least that gives him some reason to be here. I'm not exactly heartbroken this part isn't in the movie because it still works without it, but it is just such a cool sequence and could have been their one opportunity to go all out with the visuals and pay homage to that comic in a sequence that is this breathtaking. Here's a change I am legitimately pissed off they cut from the movie though. The fact that Ruthye doesn't even get to prove herself on the Green Sun planet. She just gets kidnapped when going to get Kara water and then breaks out of prison, which is fine, but so disconnected from Kara at what should be a pivotal moment for them both as they inspire each other when isolated on this planet, fending off dinosaurs in the comics. You can't tell me that wouldn't have been the sickest thing you've ever seen. There, once Kara passes out, Ruthye is left to fend for herself and gets to show her capabilities as a warrior when she fights off these big monsters. Then when Kara comes to, she's able to see the persistence Ruthye has as she was able to protect them both. That right there should have been the moment when they are closer than ever, but instead they get separated and Kara never gets to see how capable Ruthye is, while Ruthye never gets to inspire Kara, and it just really annoyed me because it feels like the one moment this film was missing to complete both of their arcs. Also, speaking of Ruthie's arc, it's crazy to me that she doesn't even get to fight Krem. This movie nerfs her so bad and she barely gets to do anything in combat. The entire story has been building up to the moment where Ruthye wants to kill Krem. And I think that it is so much more impactful when she actually gets to fight him and show that she's capable of doing such a thing, so that when she sees the error of her ways thanks to Supergirl's influence, it feels more impactful because she's making the active choice to not go through with it when she could have. Then after that, there is an even more impactful moment when Ruthye talks Kara off the ledge and encourages her to stop this cycle of violence, showing both how far she's come and how much Supergirl still struggles with all that grief and trauma inside of her. In the movie, after all the work has been done for her, Ruthye just walks up and goes to try and finish the job. It's one of those changes I'm really conflicted about because in the context of the comic it's adapting, not letting Ruthye fight Krem is very underwhelming. But in the context of the movie, I kind of get it because the whole point of this film is that Kara is protecting Ruthye Ruthye from ever having to get violent to save her soul. So it works in that extent, but I would have liked her to have some kind of moment where she flirts with that violence to give us more drama and actually tease that decision, because otherwise she's just kind of tagging along and doesn't have much agency in this story. Okay, here's a change that at first I didn't like, but the more I've thought about it, the more I think it actually improves on the story. In the Woman of Tomorrow comic, there's this big reveal that Kara actually saves Krypto right after he got shot by giving him the antidote. I get the point of it, as they're trying to show that Kara selflessly went on this journey just to help Ruthye rather than her own quest for vengeance. But in the movie, Krypto just straight up gets shot, and I think that is a big improvement for an adaptation to make. I think that works in the comic with an already established Supergirl, but when Kara is so messy at the beginning of this movie, her making such a mature choice like that would kind of feel out of place, so I get why they cut that. More importantly, that reveal takes away all of the narrative weight and tension, knowing that the problem they were trying to solve was done the entire time, and with a movie like this, that could have been a very unsatisfying reveal. Instead, we get a much more rewarding conclusion here when Kara is able to actually save Krypto, which is even more effective when he basically acts as the stand-in for Krypton as a whole, almost giving Kara this second chance to prove she was able to save her people. It is a very welcome change that does a lot for Kara's character. I don't know if I can say the same thing about the next one though, because this change is the source for the majority of my problems in this movie, when Kara actually kills Krem after telling Ruthye not to. What? I've had a really hard time wrapping my head around this change since watching the movie a few days ago, and even now, it is the source of all my conflict in regard to the film, because having Kara kill Krem fundamentally misunderstands the original comic. This entire story builds up to this one moment where Kara shows how she has survived unimaginable loss and still chooses to be good, taking the high road and proving that vengeance isn't worth it as she banishes Krem to the Phantom Zone. But in the movie, they strangely take a completely opposite stance, as Kara has this do as I say, not as I do mentality, having Ruthye go away, and then once she's gone, she does the dirty work to kill Krem. It is quite literally the inverse approach from the comic, as there, it is Supergirl's influence more than her words that makes up Ruthie's mind for her. In the heat of that moment, Kara still actively doubts herself, as she doesn't feel like she taught Ruthye anything worthwhile, as the horrors of the world burned her out. And what is so powerful about that is that even in the face of Kara doubting herself and the world around her, her actions inspired Ruthye to be better. It's a beautiful moment and a celebration of growth between these two characters, as they then lock Krem up for hundreds of years until he finally sees the error of his ways, as he even goes as far as to apologize to Ruthye in the future. For this kind of story, allowing that to be an option feels like it would have been so much more thematically relevant. But the issue is, they could not have done this. They wrote themselves into this corner, completely changing Krem's character, and in doing so, Krem kind of needed to die with the way they built him up. Within the confines of this movie, and a narrative centered around Kara protecting little girls from violence, it makes sense she would kill the source of that violence. Even if she did, say, have access to the Phantom Zone in this movie, I don't know if this version of Krem, who is so intrinsically evil, could ever change, as they make a point to show he's cruel for the sake of being cruel and he enjoys it. When adapting Woman of Tomorrow, they specifically rewrote the story with the intention of always having Krem die, despite that going against the messaging of the comic, and I don't know how to feel about that, because it kind of works within the narrative they set up, but not the themes. Kara is actively doing good like her mom said. She is helping the helpless like her father championed her to do. This kill is the ultimate example of the message of this movie, that you don't have to be nice, you just have to be good, as she is doing a net positive good thing even if it isn't the nicest option like rehabilitation. It makes sense for the story they wrote with Kara and Krem, but it is so jarring in contrast with Ruthie's entire story if Kara just secretly killed Krem at the end. Like, yeah, he deserved to die. You could even argue he deserved to die in the comics. He did a whole purple genocide. But he needed to die in this movie because they specifically wrote him to be this irredeemable force of pure evil who had to go. And the more I talk about it, the more conflicted I get. Instead of positioning Kara as someone with this newfound sense of hope for the future as she finally found her people, it treats her as a protector who's willing to do the hard thing to keep others pure. Which, admittedly, is a very interesting character trait, but it doesn't feel very Supergirl. To me, this decision depends on the execution for the future. If they treat this kill like a big deal and have it ripple throughout her life, putting her in conflict with other characters like Superman and Man of Tomorrow, as they have a completely different outlook on if you should kill people or not, and you explore that as a theme of the film, I think that it would retroactively make this a little bit better. It's just that we don't have that kind of foresight right now and how that's going to affect her in the long term, and right now in the short term, it just feels very out of character for Kara to do such a thing. If you're gonna make such a bold change to Supergirl's character, I think you have to build that decision up more in the movie, because I don't think we get to explore the idea of Kara being this protector at all costs, putting all the blood on her hands so other people don't have to experience that, there is definitely some potential for that for the future of this franchise and seeing how Kara evolves, because it is such a heroic idea to put that burden on your shoulders. The movie just doesn't present that idea enough. And when comparing an adaptation to the source material, I think that the idea of Kara seeing past her own trauma and grief to help Ruthye and choose rehabilitation is more satisfying with the story they set up. But again, he had to die because he was a pedophile and a rapist. I think my big issue with Krem being a human trafficker, besides the fact that he's human trafficking people, is that the movie doesn't do enough with it. There's pretty much only one scene where Kara goes to rescue the girls he had locked up. A revelation that big and important should have changed something about the focus and direction the movie was going to directly give it more weight in the narrative rather than feeling like an afterthought. It is an extremely sensitive subject matter that feels like it was haphazardly thrown into the story just to give Kara an excuse to kill Krem instead of tying more into her hero's journey and actually giving that kind of plotline the gravity it deserves in the narrative. The more I've sat with the idea of Kara being this protector of women and girls around the galaxy, I really love it. I just think that they really needed to build up that moment more and tie it directly into the story so that Kara making that choice feels more cathartic. I can tell a lot of my critiques with this movie come with the fact that it's an adaptation issue, because the friend I went to see this movie with has never read Woman of Tomorrow, and he loved it. So it's clearly just a me thing going in with those expectations, but no matter how hard I've tried, I cannot look past the changes when they feel undercooked. This movie is a very stripped-back version of the comic, which makes sense. There's a lot of ground to cover, and I don't think you could fit it all in one film. But the issue comes with the fact that it's more so the skeleton of the comic without any of the meat, and then they kind of like throw different meat on the skeleton. I don't know, this metaphor is stupid, but they change so many different foundational elements of the story that the core messaging is very different. I am trying so hard to look at this movie objectively and not let my knowledge of Woman of Tomorrow cloud my enjoyment too much, but the issue comes with the fact that the way this movie unfolds and the narrative they tell isn't as good as the comic, so it's gonna be hard to ignore. Outside of the more technical issues I had with this movie, I could honestly see myself softening on these changes in the future after some rewatches and seeing what they do with Kara from here on out. That way I will finally be able to see the full picture and accept this movie for what it is rather than what it could be. And the worst part is, I only have myself to blame here. For months, when talking about Supergirl, I hammered home the point that I hadn't read the Woman of Tomorrow comic because I didn't want to give myself unreasonable expectations for the movie, but I got greedy and caved, reading the book, and now here we are, as I question whether that was the right decision or not. I am really trying my best nowadays to get better at reviewing and not let my biases cloud my judgment, but for a movie like Supergirl, which touted itself on adapting the Woman of Tomorrow comic, I think it's reasonable to have those expectations and be disappointed when they didn't deliver on them and gave us a story that contradicts that narrative. You know what? No, I don't regret reading the comic because I think that the movie should be able to stand on its own. I just don't think they did the best job setting that narrative up to the point where it does, because instead of feeling like a changed adaptation, it feels like an adaptation with holes in it. Is it still an enjoyable movie? 100%. Is it frustrating? Yeah, definitely. You've got one shot to do this story and it came out underwhelming. Is it the end of the DCU as we know it? No. I have seen so many people going crazy, overreacting, saying things like the DCU is doomed. Guys, we're 2 projects in. It's okay if they go through a few growing pains. It's a real shame it had to happen to Supergirl, but the movie is just fine. It's not the end of the world. If this film was insultingly bad, that's a different conversation. But the movie is not that. I just hope that James Gunn and DC learn the right lessons from Supergirl. The big lesson I think they should take away from Supergirl not working as well as it should have is to either embrace the comics more or to take bold risks that actually improve on the story. And you know what? Actually, there's 2 lessons. Stop making your movies so short. One of my problems with Superman was that I thought it should have been longer. Supergirl is even shorter, and you can really feel that length as they didn't have enough time to tell the story. The DCU is in its infancy right now. It's allowed to make mistakes. It's just unfortunate that this mistake comes at a time where people are so tired of by-the-numbers superhero movies that they're not going to go out and see Supergirl, despite the fact that it's fun, and Milly Alock gives an incredible performance that more people need to be excited about for the future. With movies like Man of Tomorrow, Clayface, hopefully a Wonder Woman adaptation that isn't based on Tom King's work, I still think the future of DC is looking bright. Shit, okay, I did forget about that. You know what, can I kill myself now? Yes? Thank God. Oh, what happened? Oh, god damn it, I'm back as a ghost. Oh, that sucks. I guess I'm here, stuck, haunting this channel forever now, cursed to make videos until the end of time. You know what, that's not too bad. I can actually accept that. While I figure out what kind of ghost powers I have, why don't you let me know down below what you thought about Supergirl? I would genuinely love to hear what everyone has to say and continue the conversation down below. And while you're at it, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you don't do it, I'm gonna kill you with a sword because that's what Supergirl taught me to do. What, I don't have a code of honor, I'll do it, I don't care. You know the rules, subscribe or you're getting stabbed.